listener production.
Hi, it's Helen Smith here. Welcome to The Briefing. It's just days before the first votes will be cast at pre-polling booths, with both leaders making some major policy announcements aimed at saving Aussies cash. And while both leaders are calling them game changers, others say they're mere sugar hits or band-aid solutions.
Yeah, absolutely they are. It's really just bringing back an old policy. But it's a one-off sugar hit. It's an election bribe.
So, will they actually make a difference to the everyday Aussie hip pocket? That's coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Cassidy. It's Tuesday, the 15th of April.
Good morning, Helen, and good morning to you listening at home, or if you're on your drive or ride to work. Happy Tuesday. Now, some of politics' most colourful characters have faced off in a Sky News Mavericks debate in northern New South Wales, including One Nation's Pauline Hanson, KAP's Bob Katter, and Nationals MP Matt Canavan.
The trio battled it out and took questions from the crowd at Tweed Heads, coming out with some bold claims, including Katter, who said Australia was experiencing a seismic shift in the political landscape and that we should get used to seeing minority governments.
Now, that does come off the back of the latest Newspoll survey, which is showing a lean toward a possible Labor minority government in a few weeks' time. Now, Katter went on to take a stab at Australia's two-party system, saying, well, he doesn't think that'll be for long.
I don't know of any two-party systems left.
But if it's got
primitive, it's outdated, and Pauline and I represent a different wave.
Now, speaking of Pauline Hanson, I bet you were wondering what she was doing during the debate. Well, she used her time to make a bit of a dig at the Teals.
Monique Ryan asked me to give this to you as an influencer, and she wants you to speak kindly of her. So I'll leave it simple.
Thank you.
Yeah, she was handing moderator Paul Murray a prop there and poking fun after Monique Ryan went on the ABC and said she had no opinion on whether influencer content paid for by politicians should be labelled as such. Now, that was after it came out that her colleague Allegra Spender had in fact paid for a number of posts, which the Teals have argued is all above board and follows AEC rules. Now, this wasn't the only debate on last night. On 7:30, there was another debate between Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor on housing. We touched on this yesterday, but basically economists are now coming out and saying both parties' new major housing policies announced over the weekend would cause a rise in housing costs and also increase further budget deficits. But Chalmers and Taylor both denied that. They played the blame game, saying each of their parties would deliver a stronger budget bottom line if elected.
A concerning 1 in 23 Aussie properties are under threat due to climate change, with a new report finding more and more parts of our country are at high risk of climate-fueled bushfires, flooding and other natural disasters. Nikki Hutley from the Climate Council says it'll only worsen if we don't take action now.
Essentially, you're getting a significant shift up in the number of properties, tens of thousands more at higher risk if we don't change course on climate pollution very quickly.
According to the stats, here are some of the biggest numbers. In New South Wales, over 260,000 properties would be at risk, and over 100,000 in Victoria and over 160,000 in Queensland. So This report has just been released this morning by Climate Council, and it also pointed out, as we saw in the recent fires in LA and Japan, enormous blazes can occur in winter and they can even happen in rainforests. So those areas people might previously have thought immune aren't.
Yeah, and look, it also raised concerns over what this will mean for home insurance. Like, will we see homes that are simply uninsurable down the track? And look, it might sound far-fetched, but that's actually a reality for several parts of North Queensland already. I worked up there and there's a number of suburbs all along the coast that the insurance rates are basically so high that they're essentially dubbed like insurance black zones. No one's insured because it's too exy, but they're also at this higher risk because they're near the water and it's in this area they get cyclones. So it might sound a bit futuristic, but it's already happening in some areas.
Yes, that's right. Katy Perry has gone intergalactic with an all-female space crew, which included Jeff Bezos' partner Lauren Sanchez, American TV personality and journalist Gayle King, who have all made it back down to Earth safely.
Katie!
With Katy Perry apparently kissing the ground dramatically when they did touch down. Now, this trip was an 11-minute mission on Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin's New Shepard, and it's the 11th human flight for the program, which so far has flown 52 people.
Wow. And yeah, look, it was a monumental moment for women in space as well. It was the nation's first space flight where women filled each seat, and the only other all-female crew was back in 1963. And apparently while up there, Katy Perry sang What a Wonderful World and said she's 100% going to record a song about her experience, which is interesting. And look, I keep hearing about these people that are going up on these like rockets or on these flights and having this like epiphany, Helen, about space and the world being small and we're all connected. Maybe we need to send some of our global leaders up there or something. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it might be a good idea. Some of the comments that they said coming down were pretty profound, saying, yeah, we're all connected. But look, going to space isn't for everyone. It's pricey, but Blue Origin declined to say how much the flight cost or who paid for what.
And it's been revealed that an Aussie gambler classic dubbed the Joker is at the heart of a $151 million US lottery scandal. Far out. That is an enormous amount of money. Now, Zelshko Ranajajek, or the Joker, is a Tasmanian gambling entrepreneur, and he's part of this scandal which dates back to 2023 when apparently a group of international gambling masters in Texas won a US $95 million, which is around $151 million Australian, after buying nearly all of the 25.8 million possible lottery combinations for just $1 a piece, Helen.
Yeah, so the prize was claimed by a company whose owner wanted to remain anonymous, but apparently the Joker was part of the few who masterminded the plan, according to the Wall Street Journal, which has led to the third largest lottery jackpot in Texas history. So the group made a profit of around US 20 million or Australian 32 million, which is wild. Now, the practice of bulk billing lottery tickets isn't illegal, and the lawyer representing the group said all applicable laws, rules and regulations were followed, but people were not happy about this, including Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who earlier this month called it the biggest theft from the people of Texas in the history of Texas.
Oh, look, I don't know where I sit on this one. I mean, like, if they're following the rules, is the problem the rules or the people? Like, but either way, gosh, I a little bit jealous. The things I could do with that amount of money. But no, thank you so much, Helen. That brings our headlines to a close, and thank you to you listening at home. Next up is My Deep Dive, looking at which party and which policies will actually help us cut costs and save us cash ahead of this upcoming election. More on that up next. It's been dubbed the cost of living election, with whoever can offer Aussies the most savings likely to win big at the polling booths. Both sides have been coming in hot with major announcements relating to housing, health and energy. But which, if any, will actually help us cut our everyday costs? Joel Gibson is a money-saving expert who reckons some of the policies being offered up are just temporary solutions, and he has some tips of his own. Joel, thank you so much for joining me on The Briefing. Over the weekend, we saw the official election campaign launched, with both leaders making some pretty major housing promises. Which party do you think made the best pitch in terms of saving Aussies cash?
Oh, that's a good question, because they're both offering to spend extraordinary amounts of money on helping us to save money, but in quite different ways. You know, we saw a lot of the focus on the weekend was on first home buyer policy, and both parties are gunning really, really hard for the first home buyer vote, but their policies are kind of miles apart. So there's a really clear choice here for first home buyers. So on the one hand, Labor's expanded their Help to Buy scheme. On the other hand, the coalition's giving people access to their super to put towards a deposit up to $50,000. And then on the weekend, we had a number of even bigger promises in a way. The coalition's come out and said they want to make mortgage interest payments tax deductible for first home buyers up to $650,000 of your loan. It's on all loans, not just loans up to $650,000. You can have a $5 million loan potentially and tax deduct the mortgage interest payments on the first $650,000 for 5 years. So that could be extraordinarily valuable to first home buyers. But Labor's countered by offering to extend their 5% home deposit guarantee scheme, which basically means they would become the bank of mum and dad, go guarantor for first home buyers, all first home buyers, and everybody could buy their first home with a 5% deposit. That's been limited till now to, I think, about 20 or 30,000 people. So, look, honestly, they're both extraordinarily generous policies, but they're quite different in terms of what they give you and who they're targeted at and who can access them.
If you had to pick one as to which would be more effective purely at saving money, which one would you pick?
Look, the Labor scheme probably is worth more in dollar terms for that very lucky 10,000 people who get access to it each year. I don't know how they're going to manage who does get access to that scheme and who misses out, whether it's sort of first in, best dressed, or it's a lottery, or there's some other, there's no mention of means testing at the moment. So it's not clear how they'll decide who gets in. But obviously the coalition is playing the card of policies that are accessible to everybody. And I think that's very powerful, is that people don't feel like they're going to be at risk of missing out, as they would with the Labor scheme. Every single first home buyer will be able to tax deduct mortgage interest for 5 years on the first $650,000 of their loan. So in a way, I think that will appeal more to some people because there's not that FOMO, that fear of missing out.
What about then looking back on the election trail so far, in your opinion, what has been the standout cost of living related policies that will have a long-term impact for Aussies?
Energy policy is obviously a big issue in this election. Both sides have agreed to $150 more in energy rebates until the end of this year. There's no one saying what happens after the end of this year. That's a bit of a mystery, but they're on the same kind of plane in terms of that. But you know what? The biggest question of all when it comes to energy is, what is Labor's renewable plan and what is the coalition's nuclear plan going to mean for household bills? And neither of them will answer that question, because the coalition spent 4 years beating them around their head with that, broken promise. So they're not about to make the mistake of putting a dollar figure on what their policy is going to save people. So there's this massive unanswered question, unfortunately, when it comes to the energy debate. There's a big hole, I suppose, in the middle of that. Look, I think energy is really important to people. And obviously the other big one is tax, which was also a major feature on the weekend.
Now, a lot of the policies that are being put forward have been dubbed sugar hits or Band-Aid solutions in terms of the cost of living crisis. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely they are. They are, absolutely. I mean, the energy rebates, we've had 2 years of them now. They've promised another 6 months. That is a Band-Aid on a bullet wound, as the coalition calls it. It's a temporary solution. It's Labor's way of getting across the bridge to the point where they hope renewables will start to make our bills cheaper, but that is still a long way off. And definitely the coalition's tax announcement on the weekend of they're calling it the cost of living tax offset. I think it's $1,200 for up to $1,200 as a one-off in the next tax return for Australians. It sort of replaces the thing that they called the low to middle income tax offset, which was wound up last year. They used to call that the Lamington, so I'm calling this one the Cosy Livington. And it's about the same amount of money. It's really just bringing back an old policy. But it's a one-off sugar hit. It's an election bribe. Absolutely it is. And some of these promises will be permanent. Like Labor's tax cut is much smaller, up to $536, kicks in a couple of years' time, but that's a permanent tax cut. The change to the price of electricity bills because of the gas domestic reservation policy, that would hopefully be a permanent impact. But a lot of this stuff is temporary, it's one-off, and all of it is expensive.
In terms of those items then, do you think it's more effective to choose a party that might be offering a smaller amount of savings over a longer period, or a bigger chunk of savings over a shorter period? Because we've seen that a bit this election.
Well, yeah, it's a bit like when you're buying something, let's say you're trying to pick an electricity plan or a telco plan or something. What's more valuable, an ongoing discount of 5% every year, or an upfront discount of $1,000 or 20% in the first year? It's hard to say. And it all depends actually what you do in the second and third year. So an ongoing discount can be hugely valuable. But let's say the coalition brings in this cost of living tax offset, $1,200 in the next tax return. Are they going to have the political courage to then take that off people the year afterwards? Because it's really hard once you give people a freebie to take it back off them. And politicians are not good at doing that. So I guess, there's a prospect that some of these temporary measures, the fuel tax cut as well, for example, would be continued at the end of that first year that they've been promised for, if the cost of living remains as tough as it is, if the political situation, the pressure remains as fierce as it is. There's a possibility some of those things could be continued. Personally, if I had to choose, I'd generally choose the ongoing discount or the tax cut, which is forever. But I still think the political reality is that some of these one-offs probably won't be one-offs at the end of the day.
Interesting. Okay. Health was another big one, with both parties agreeing on big Medicare and PBS announcements aimed at saving money via those day-to-day expenses. And look, they sound great, but do you think they'll actually be effective?
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, look, they're talking about capping medicines on the PBS at, I think it's $25, which is, quite a bit less than the current cap. And, that is a bipartisan promise now because, the coalition matched that promise from Labor immediately. That will be worth, that'll be a significant saving for a lot of people, particularly pensioners who use a lot more medicines than other people and have a lot less money. So, yeah, I think that could make a big difference. And if they can get bulk billing rates up, they've grown them slightly, I think, over the last kind of year or two. If they can continue to grow bulk billing rates, then, yeah, that does, if you have to pay $50, $100 every time you go to the doctor, which a lot of us do now, particularly for older people, that adds up. It really adds up.
Do you think there are any sectors or issues that are being missed when it comes to addressing cost of living for Aussies?
Oh, yeah, there's a couple of massive sort of missing pieces in this campaign so far, and I'm hoping that they're, holding something back so that they had something to announce in the last 2 weeks. But the reality is we're about to go on Easter and Anzac Day holidays, and people are going to switch off, and so they've probably announced most of their big policies by now. But where is the policy to deal with insurance unaffordability? I mean, insurance premiums have been going up by, at some point last year, they were going up by an average of 17% on average, and that was happening for an 18-month period. So most people got 2 increases at that 15, 16, 17% kind of level, and I've seen people with increases of 30, 40, 50% on their car and home insurance. So nobody's talked about insurance yet in this campaign. The other big missing piece is grocery prices. We've had a year of reports and reviews and politicians banging the drum about grocery prices and supermarket price gouging, and then we have an election campaign, and all of a sudden, no one's talking about it. Labor had a policy to outlaw price gouging and bring in a task force to kind of make price gouging illegal, so at least there's been something there, but that sort of fell a bit flat, I think, because people think, oh, here we go, another task force, another review, another government process. When's someone going to actually do something that will make a difference to my grocery bill? And I haven't seen anything yet.
If you had one bit of advice for listeners in terms of trying to cut between these policies and what might work to save some money, any advice for them?
Honestly, this is the cost of living election. And if you're a first home buyer, for example, no matter who wins, you're going to win. So there is something here for everybody. My piece of advice would be, don't wait for the government to come and rescue you from the cost of living if you're not already making sure that you're on one of the cheapest energy plans available, that you're not paying hundreds of dollars more than you have to for a telco plan. If your home loan is 20, 30, 40 basis points more than it should be, that's costing you thousands of dollars a year probably. So just make sure that you get your own house in order first and foremost. And anything that you get from the government, any sweeteners, any election bribes you get, that's a nice to have. That's a cherry on top. But ultimately, you can probably save yourself hundreds or thousands of dollars by sticking up for yourself. So I think it starts there.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great advice there. Thank you so much, Joel. And thank you so much for joining me on The Briefing.
Thanks, Tara.
That was money-saving expert and author of Kill Bills and Easy Money, Joel Gibson. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we would love it if you could share this app with someone who might find it interesting. And don't forget, you can also check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed with another ep this afternoon from 4. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.